We'd like to welcome a very special guest here with us today on SchuBro's Unfiltered. We have Texas State Representative Brooks Landgraf. How are you doing today, sir?
Ross and Kyle, I'm doing very well. Thank y'all for having me on.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. It's a great honor to have you on here. I just want to go over and let our listeners know a little bit about you. I mean, you're a Texas State Representative. You serve the 81st District of Texas, which is Odessa, North, Permian Basin kind of area, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We're right here, 4 counties in the heart of the Permian Basin, kind of where West Texas meets southeastern New Mexico.
So, and you were born and raised out in Odessa. Is that what I read that correctly?
That's right. Yeah, born and raised in Odessa, and my family has been ranching in West Texas, a little bit closer down to the Big Bend area for 5 generations. So, yeah, I'm West Texas through and through, and very proud of it.
And you're class of 03 from Texas.
Kyle,
that's right, and very importantly, I'm a member of the Fighting Texas Aggie class of 2003.
Very, very good. So, I mean, once again, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a few minutes of your time. We understand that you're very busy, and we don't want to take up too much of your time, but, we did want to talk about a few issues and let you talk and address how they affect, your district, and not only just Texas, but your district as well. But then also we'll talk a little bit about, the state of Texas A&M football and where we think they're headed with Jimbo Fisher over the next couple of years. So first I wanted to bring up, which would be the Robin Hood Act. So I've started living out in West Texas myself. I'm starting to hear a little bit more about the Robin Hood Act and how it affects West Texas. So could you describe to our listeners what the Robin Hood Act is in Texas, how it works, and then, what West Texas, and Texas as a whole, what it means to them?
Sure. So the Robin Hood Act, it's also known as recapture, was put in place here in Texas about 30 years ago. And most of your listeners probably know that public schools in Texas are primarily funded through property taxes. And of course, just the nature of valuations being what they are, property taxes can generate more revenue in certain parts of the state than they do others. And so 30 years ago, when the legislature implemented Robin Hood, the idea was that, look, we'll take from certain areas of the state that are generating a lot more property tax and redistribute that to other areas of the state that don't generate as much. And so the idea was that you're stealing from so-called rich school districts and giving that money to the so-called poor school districts. And that's how we got the Robin Hood moniker to go along with that. Now, in a certain sense that sounds okay. If each school district's needs are being met, or if that's actually working the way that it's supposed to. But if there's anything that we've learned in 30 years, it's that not all of that money gets to where it is intended to go. But more importantly, at least from the Permian Basin's perspective and other parts of the state, especially energy producing areas, they need that money desperately in those school districts whenever energy prices are up and that revenue is being generated, because you have teacher shortages, you have extremely high cost of living. And so it's really a broken system, not to mention the fact that when Robin Hood was implemented 30 years ago, there were only a few dozen school districts that qualified as the so-called rich school districts. Now we're getting close to where, we're approaching in excess of 40% of school districts in the state qualify. So the system was never designed to become what it has become, but it's also creating problems in school districts where this money is being taken. And very importantly, we're not seeing the help being provided to the school districts that were supposed to benefit from it, in large part because a lot of that money gets lost in this bureaucratic maze in between the donors and the recipients.
So what is being done maybe on the state side, what can be done to try to balance this out? Is there a way to modify this? Does it need to be scrapped wholesale and just each school district keeps their money? Or is there a way to change the qualifications for what schools qualify as the donors and what schools qualify as the recipients to make it more equitable? What, in your mind, what needs to be done there?
Well, I think we need to look at all of those strategies. I've filed legislation in the last 2 legislative sessions that would just scrap Robin Hood as we know it. Now, I know that politically that's not really a viable option, just because there are so many legislators from school districts that are on the other side of the equation from where I am. And as you know, in the legislature, things are a numbers game. You have to have a majority of votes in order to get something passed. And so, it's always going to be very difficult just to have an outright repeal. But if we do have that, we need to have something to replace it. Now, a situation that we've gotten ourselves into here in Texas is that we have become very detrimentally reliant on property taxes in general to fund public education. And I think that is something that we need to reform. And we took a good step toward doing that last year through House Bill 3, where the state is actually devoting a much larger share of state funding that is derived from sales tax revenue to cover the costs of public education. So a lot of these problems that we've been talking about when it comes to school finance, but then also when it comes to Robin Hood, have been addressed through this legislation. Problem is that it only lasts for 2 years because we work on a biennial budget cycle here in Texas. And so we'll have to reevaluate again in 2021 when the legislature reconvenes. But I think we've gotten ourselves on the right track. We just have to stay there. But in House Bill 3, you mentioned Tom Craddock, and he and I and several other reps were sure to take a bite out of Robin Hood in that process. And so we actually reduced Robin Hood payments across the state by 47%, which is huge. In fact, some school districts that were paying into Robin Hood are no longer paying into Robin Hood. But importantly, school districts across the state, including those that are supposed to be the recipients or beneficiaries under the Robin Hood funding proposal, are still getting more money per pupil because of this increase in state funding. So I think we have a good blueprint for moving forward. We've already done it here for 2020 and for 2021. There's a lot of wind at our backs, and we just have to work hard to keep it going that way.
Sounds good. Now, over here in College Station, we have Kyle Cassell as our state rep. Are you familiar with him?
I know Kyle very well. Yes, he's a great state rep.
I've really liked him over the years, and he runs a similar business to what our father does, which is bird hunting here in College Station there at the Tonkaway Ranch. So we've kind of had that opportunity to meet each other through that experience. So we've always been cordial to one another, and I think he's a great guy. I think he's doing a good job over there. But with that being said, him being a landowner, yourself being a landowner and a farmer, with the passage of the USMCA, and I'm gonna joke with myself here a little bit. If you haven't listened to our previous shows, the Marine Corps Canada and Mexico Act that went into place just recently. Do you see that being a big benefit for our Texas farmers and our Texas ranchers? And if so, where do you see that being most beneficial for us?
No, I absolutely see USMCA being very beneficial for the Texas economy, but specifically for our agricultural industry and for the energy industry as well. But look, we grow a lot of crops here in Texas, and we have very substantial trading partners in Mexico and Canada. In fact, Mexico is by far the largest trading partner that Texas has, and Canada is in second place in that category. So anything that we can do to strengthen the trade relationships with our top trading partners is always going to be a good thing. But I think the ag community, the ag industry, and the energy industry, are particularly benefiting, or will certainly see greater benefits as USMCA becomes fully implemented.
yeah, I definitely think we'll see, a lot of farmers benefiting there. But another industry that's starting to bloom, especially out in West Texas, is renewable energy when it comes to wind power, solar power, and other renewable sources. I mean, how do you see renewables impacting the West Texas infrastructure and the West Texas economy, and then the economy of Texas as a whole?
Well, so we're seeing quite a bit of development here in the district that I serve and throughout the Permian Basin. There are three things that we have a lot of. Now, unlike, there in the Brazos Valley, we don't have a whole lot of water. We don't have a whole lot of trees, but we do have a lot of oil and gas. We have a lot of sunlight, and we have a lot of wind. And as you know, those are three things that produce a lot of energy. And so we've been known as a mecca for oil and gas for more than a century now, or right around a century. But here in the last 5 or 6 years, we've really seen a tremendous amount of growth and development of solar farms, and really going back about 20 years, we've seen a tremendous growth in the wind energy sector. And I think those are great developments. For the most part, they've been able to coexist pretty well out here in the Permian Basin. Now, in terms of having all of the above approach to energy, I think anything that we can do to generate our own helps to keep us energy independent. It helps diversify the economy. It helps create jobs. And I think those are all tremendous things. So I'm for it. Now, when you get into the subsidy issue, that's where I start to have some concerns. But in terms of just the viability and production of renewable energy sources, I think that's a great thing.
So I'm happy you brought up the issues of subsidies, because I'd actually, and I don't know if you saw it, I had sent your team a policy proposal. So I do some policy consulting for a few of the congressional candidates out here in District 11. And so I took a swing at the subsidies. And basically what I proposed was extending the ag exemption tax, to people who then put in renewables. So instead of having to have cows, chickens, sheep, whatever, that ag and timber property tax exemption would cover people who had wind farms or solar farms. But in the same breath of that amendment, it was ending all subsidies for solar and wind and renewable energy. Do you think there's room to expand on our traditional agricultural exemptions to start encompassing some of those renewable energy sources, or do you think we ought to leave that alone? I mean, what do you think of that? Maybe you didn't get to see it.
I did briefly get to see it, and it's a very interesting proposal. I appreciate you taking some time to put that together. I do like the idea of taking an existing exemption like the ag use exemption and simply broadening the definition. That's not really creating something that's entirely new. Property owners know how that works. Appraisal districts know how that works. So I think that could create a smooth transition. It also, doesn't allow for, the perception of unfair double dipping on different tax exemptions, things like that. So, I would need to vet it and flush it out a little bit more. But, at first blush, I definitely like that concept. And it seems to be it seems to be considerably more fair than some of the other subsidies that we have seen, particularly in the past. So, if you're going to get in that game, I kind of like the way that your proposal would play it. But there is a larger question about whether or not we should be in that game at all.
So as a brother, I hate to admit it, but I actually did like his idea. And mainly for the fact that it doesn't have a stipulation on how many acres you have to own in order to be eligible for the credit. The thing I didn't like was that it expired after so many years, but the fact that, me as a small landowner, meaning less than an acre, because that's what my, home lot is on, I would be eligible for the exemption. Whereas with traditional ag exemption, even with bees, I'd have to have at least, I think, 10 acres to qualify. And that is a huge tax burden relief that I'm not, currently I don't qualify for, but it would be very beneficial to me as a, homeowner inside the city limits. But
Right. No, I mean, that's why I think there's quite a bit of merit to it. And, so as far as, getting in that realm, I think it's a good approach.
Okay. I'm go ahead.
So now,
go ahead, Ross.
I was going to bring up a little bit of Aggie football real quick. Talk with you. Just get your thoughts. I mean, we've seen A&M basketball actually be doing pretty well this year. I mean, I think they're beating expectations. Is that kind of your theory there?
Yeah, I think Buzz has created quite a bit of excitement in Aggie land with his approach. Definitely a young team, and I think it's safe to say that we've seen them playing fairly inconsistently, but they've picked up some big road wins. Seem to be getting better as the season progresses. So, I definitely like where we are. It's kind of hard to believe that we're only a couple of seasons removed from a Sweet 16 team, but I think Buzz has the program going in the right direction, and he seems to be doing pretty well on the recruiting trail too, which has historically been a little bit difficult for Aggie basketball.
Yes, he did just pick up that commitment from a kid in Oklahoma that was a top 50 player. Very significant pickup. I think he was even considered a 5-star on a few different evaluators. And that's something that hasn't happened for quite a long time. It was actually the last time it actually happened when Buzz was in here previously under Billy Clyde Gillespie. So when we picked up DeAndre Jordan out of Houston. So the fact that Buzz is going into another state, and then a kid that was heavily considered an Arkansas lean, and Arkansas is a historically good basketball program, to be able to pull him away from Arkansas and towards A&M is very significant.
No, I agree. And hopefully that's a sign for things to come. And of course, good news is with basketball, you can turn it around very quickly from one year to the next. So, a great anchor in a recruiting class like that's going to go a long way.
So we saw the football team. I mean, you could say theoretically the football team took a step backwards this year, but that's also kind of hard to say because of the talent they played. I mean, they played what's got to be one of the toughest schedules ever in college football history. Does any bit of what they were able to accomplish this year give you more faith, and especially with the recruiting prowess that we've seen coming up and, the class that y'all have coming in, does that give you more faith in Jimbo Fisher? And are you thinking that you guys are on the right track towards an SEC championship?
Well, look, we play in the most difficult division in college football. I don't think there's any question about that. So there is no easy path toward an SEC West division title and no easy path to an SEC championship. And quite frankly, there probably going to have to be a couple of coaching retirements at some other universities before anybody can really get in an express lane to an SEC championship out of the West. But no, I definitely like everything that Jimbo's doing. As far as, the 2019 season being a step back, it's hard for me to characterize it that way. First of all, I think that the improvement that was made during Jimbo's first season in 2018 was much greater than expected. And then, having great tight end play from Jay Sternberger, who, as a JC transfer played 1 year and then, was drafted into the league. And then, we missed, we were decimated at the running back position this year, especially after losing Travion Williams. So, those two important skill positions, I think, made a big difference in our offensive production. So you had NFL level talent at two key positions without anybody really able to step up and replace it. and then you add on top of that just the brutal schedule. It was a tough recipe, but I think the team actually did get better. The only embarrassing game of the season was at LSU, but as we all know, LSU, one of the best football teams in a generation, was put on the field in Baton Rouge this year. So, it wasn't a pretty game there Thanksgiving weekend, but I don't think that you can use that. But nobody looked good against LSU this year. So, but I think they did get better as the season wore on. Played Georgia really tough late in the season at Athens. And look, we rebounded pretty well in the Texas Bowl against Oklahoma State. So I'm expecting big things in the 2020 season. And my dad is also an Aggie, and he and I were talking about, what's going to be different next year. And the biggest difference is that instead of playing at Clemson and at Georgia, we replace those games with, 2 home games against Colorado and Vanderbilt. So, that there's already a built-in improvement in the season as long as we take care of business. So I don't expect us to compete for an SEC West title next season, but I do expect us to be absolutely competitive in every game and probably beat a couple of teams that we're not expected to.
So
I think Kyle and I both agree with that.
So would your opinion be, which was the bigger hit to our team this year? Eric McCoy leaving early and going in the second round to the Saints, or Travion Williams leaving for the NFL and going in 6th round to the Bengals?
It's hard to, I don't know. You guys are probably better at this than I am, but I can't really separate. I mean, I don't think Travion Williams would have been Travion Williams without Eric McCoy, leading that offensive line. So, but anytime you lose an NFL caliber offensive lineman, I think it's really hard to replace somebody like that. Even though, Travion was the one putting up, breaking all sorts of records during his junior year back in 2018. I don't know. It was kind of a 1-2 punch that was just really tough to overcome, losing both of them.
I think, when you look at, like you said, NFL offensive linemen, I think are rarer than NFL running back. And we see that premium placed on them in their draft capital. And Eric McCoy had, he was an all rookie as this year with the Saints. I mean, he was the anchor to their offensive line coming in. So he definitely held his own and definitely showed that he belonged in the NFL. And, I think that reflects well on A&M, that the picks A&M has that go in the first round typically turn into NFL caliber players, whether that be Von Miller, whether that be Mike Evans, whether that be, Eric McCoy in the second round, whether that be, Jake Matthews going out to Atlanta. I mean, there's been a couple. There's been Johnny and there's been Luke Jokel who didn't really pan out, but you could also point to where they went as being a part of that more than just.
No, I agree.
Their talent. So, Representative, I want to thank you for your time. I want to give you just one, little bit of time here. If you got a little bit more for us, I just want you to, tell us what you see upcoming for Texas, what you see upcoming in our next legislative session. Is there any big things we should be on the lookout for? Is there any things that we should be calling our representatives, trying to talk to them about, trying to, get our opinion out there? Is there anything our listeners need to be aware of so that they're ready for this next upcoming legislative session?
Well, this upcoming 2021 session is going to be far different than any that I've experienced. I've been through 3 of these, and this one's going to be absolutely unlike any of those others. And let me tell you why. And I think everybody in Texas needs to be aware of this. There are some political winds that are blowing throughout the country and throughout the state. And I don't know that it's changing fundamentally, who we are as a people, who we are as Texans. But in key pockets of the state, particularly in suburbs, you're seeing some pretty significant partisan shifts. So places that just a decade ago, and I'm talking about, suburban Dallas-Fort Worth, areas in between Austin and San Antonio that have, 10 years ago been among the most reliably Republican Texas House districts in the state, were in some cases won by Democrats in 2018. So much so that our Republican majority in the Texas House has dwindled down to 9 seats out of 150. So we lost 12 seats in 2018. If we lose 9 in 2020, then the Republican Party will not be the majority party in the Texas House of Representatives. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. There are a lot of us who are working hard to make sure that it doesn't, but it is a possibility, and it's a more real possibility now than it has been at any point since 2009. Now, even taking that out of the equation, we are going to have a new Speaker of the House when the 2021 session convenes. Now, it could be a Democrat, could be a Republican, but it will be somebody new. And so that is going to be, that's a big X factor because the Speaker of the Texas House wields so much influence over the legislative process. Then, on top of that, you can add the fact that we are going to be redrawing congressional districts and redrawing Texas House and Texas Senate districts because 2021 will be a redistricting year after the 2020 census is conducted across the country and across Texas later this year. So big changes are underway, but I encourage all of your listeners to be engaged in the process and to be in touch with your reps. I know for me, I do a better job when I'm informed about what's most important to my constituents. And that way I don't have to guess as much. I've got a pretty good idea most of the time, but there are certain things where, constituent feedback that's immediate and direct can be very helpful and make it easier for me to do my job. So we are in store for some very turbulent times, and I encourage everybody to be engaged as we approach the next legislative session.
Okay. And do you have time for one more question, or do you need to get going?
I need to get going. My wife is a news anchor. We've got a pretty tight window for our family dinner here, so I've probably got 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, I was going to ask you about your letter to the TRS, but that might take more than 2 or 3 minutes. But you do seem very efficient in your talking, so if you think you have enough time, feel free.
Yeah, no, look, there's been a big controversy with the Texas teacher retirement system. And, they've outgrown the building that they have been using in Austin for the last 35, 40 years. Problem is that they have signed a lease for some very expensive real estate in downtown Austin. In fact, part of their operations would be moved to a brand new high-rise tower, and the lease on that would cost more than $300,000 a month. And that seems to be pretty extravagant, and it's caught my attention and the attention of a lot of my colleagues, especially because TRS has been complaining for as long as I've been in the legislature, and probably for longer than that they don't have enough resources to take care of the retired teachers that they're supposed to be taken care of. And so, look, and they've made all sorts of arguments about why this is a good investment. And look, we can have that debate. But, optics are also important in all of this. And, you'd have to make a pretty convincing case about why it would be okay to spend $326,000 a month on office space when we have retired teachers in Texas who have not gotten a cost of living adjustment in years and are not being taken care of the way that we promised as a state that we would take care of them in exchange for a relatively low salary and to help educate future generations of Texans. So, they're going to have all sorts of creative arguments about why this is a good idea. I feel like, if you need good office space, we absolutely need that for them, but for a retirement system, they can buy real estate, they can develop their own property, and I think that would be a much better investment. Then they have equity in that they could sell off later if they outgrow that space. There are much better ways to do this. And then also, I think it rubbed a lot of us the wrong way in the legislature and rubbed a lot of retired teachers the wrong way that they were so secretive about all of this and tried to keep it under wraps. Look, TRS at the end of the day is using public resources. They are supposed to be held accountable by the public, and they were trying to hide the ball from the public, and that in and of itself creates some problems for me, creates problems for retired teachers. And when it comes down to a bureaucrat spending money like a drunken sailor or retired teachers here in my district, I'm gonna fight for those retired teachers because I think it's just the right thing to do.
I definitely appreciate that. My wife's I was saying,
Representative, before we create a... Go ahead, Kyle. Finish your sentence.
I was saying I definitely appreciate that. My wife is a teacher, so we're both relatively young, but eventually one day we will get to that retirement age, and she is paying into that system. So we would definitely appreciate that those funds being readily available to us once she does get to that age to retire.
Well, she's worked hard to get that benefit, and I'm going to fight to help protect it.
Well, Representative, you said you had problems with them and problems from other people. Before we cause problems with your wife, let's let you get off the phone and get to dinner. But I want to tell you, we have every bit of gratitude in the world for you taking some time for us today and sitting down and talking with us. We welcome you back with open arms anytime you'd like to come. If you have anything you'd ever like to talk about that you think our listeners need to hear about, we most certainly welcome you back. And thank you again so much from both Kyle and I for your time today.
Well, Kyle and Ross, thank y'all for having me on. I'd love to come back sometime and gig 'em, and God bless Texas.
Gig 'em and God bless.
Gig 'em and God bless, sir.